guess that's as good as it's gonna get. Story of my life. That's what I was waiting for. I know this is one of the best short story collections I've read in recent years because it is too hard to say even now which of these stories is my favorite. Like, there are 7 stories total in this collection, and 4 of them are probably tied for my favorites, and that kind of feels insulting to the other 3. Hello, Nate Rankin, books you haven't read. Welcome aboard. Today, I'm discussing a book I read recently, a new book, which I don't do as often. It came out this year, called Rejection by Tulathimutte. This is billed as a novel in short stories. The connections between the stories are not that strong or vital. It's not the same as, say, something like Jesus' Son by Denis Johnson, where you're getting the progression of one character in, discrete separate stories, but still an overall arc or narrative. This is a case where all of the stories happen more or less in the same universe. Some characters pass in and out of the stories, but you would be forgiven if you didn't necessarily notice it on your first read-through. I remember Tony's first book, Private Citizens, got a lot of praise from voices and corners of the internet that I respected, and then I bought it, and as I often do, proceeded to never read it. It's back there on one of those shelves. I think it's on this shelf in here somewhere. What got me to pick up this book was, again, voices and parts of the internet that I respect and listen to directed me to the first short story in this collection, which is available online at N+1 Magazine. I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. And I read through that and had that immediate just gut reaction of, oh, this is something good, in a way that I don't necessarily always come across in contemporary literature. So I want to start right off with that first story, which is entitled The Feminist, because right off the bat, he just has to be invoked. David Foster Wallace, right? I'm surprised we didn't actually have a character that was like a fan of David Foster Wallace in this collection. This story felt like it would have been the ideal character to have read him, to have loved to read him. A lot of this whole book does remind me of brief interviews with hideous men. It's full of hyper-conscious, self-critical, yet narcissistically protective identities. People who know what's wrong with them and are disgusted by themselves, but also have just like an inexhaustible well of self-pity that can be too easily weaponized back out toward or to the world. And that's how rejection works in this book. It's not just stories of romantic rejection. It is primarily that, though. And this story very much is. It's also stories of the characters then often rejecting the world, of closing off vulnerability. This is a great first story because it's one of the first types of stories I guess you'd imagine. It's kind of the platonic ideal of the beginning of a short story collection like this. It's about a guy who considers himself a feminist, moves in progressive, or you could say woke circles, but who, through repeated rejection, finds himself blaming the feminism that he's always adhered to. He sees himself as unmasculine, particularly he has a big hang-up about his narrow shoulders, and by the end of the story he just gets into like full-on incel thinking and ideology. The main character is both very specific and very archetypal, and for that reason I think it's very well placed at the start of the collection. Its positioning also works well with the final metafictional story, which I'll cover a bit at the end. I'll put a link down to this story below. I recommend it as the best first jumping off point. I'm giving mild spoilers for a lot of these. I don't really believe in spoilers, but I'm giving mild spoilers throughout, so just fair warning now. But I will leave enough to the imagination, or enough for you to explore. The second short story is called Pics, and this concerns a female protagonist. This also feels a little David Foster Wallace light. Now, when I say that in both this story and the previous story, I don't think that the writing style is DFW light. he's much more, I mean, everyone's kind of choppier compared to David Foster Wallace. There are not the long, antagonistically long, breathless sentences. Not all the time, sometimes there are. But what I really mean when I compare this to David Foster Wallace, I'm, one, probably revealing the poverty of my ability to make comparisons in the first place. But two, I'm also trying to locate it in subject matter and character pathology. The female protagonist of this story hooks up with a male friend of hers, and, you know, she dreams that this will be the start of a relationship, and it just turns out that it's going to be a one-time thing. He becomes the object of desire that she constantly yearns for, but then also despises because of the lack of reciprocity. She can't get over the obsession with him, but she's also aware of the repulsion to him. And a lot of the action of the story is kind of her acting out and trying to direct her energy into something else. So, like, you know, she ends up thinking about getting a cat at one point, but then she gets a bird. She plans a whole Thanksgiving dinner, and then it just ends horrendously. She tries to get into cooking, and in fact, both of those two plot elements kind of converge in one scene, and it ends up being a wreck. Another thing that I really liked about this story is that throughout the whole story, there's an ongoing group chat between her and a group of her friends, and it's a place that this girl, whose name is Allison, if I'm remembering correctly, she kind of continuously goes to crash out, but then, you know, she'll rein herself in a number of times before she has just the ultimate crash out. She is a very pathetic character, as a lot of these characters are, and yet I found her patheticness quite sympathetic. It's like she may use, the character may use, or the third person narration of the character may use this terminology, but it's like she's addicted to this guy, or she's addicted to the idea of this guy. And he's a real piece of work too, because he obviously understands the power that he has over her and the attraction she has to him that's not romantically reciprocal. But he's also very cunning, and he's very evasive in how he uses it. He does it in such a way to where he's never obviously or outright the bad guy, or at least he's not, you know, a bad enough guy in a way that she can satisfyingly ever confront about him. The third story is called Ahegao. This was the first one where I think the reader finally gets rewarded with some humor, or with, like, humor being a huge part or a huge reward of the story. There are other, like, you know, humorous asides and missives within the other two stories, but this one and the next one particularly, I think, center humor in the best ways out of the collection. I think the first two are really pressing down hard on your ability to, I don't know, withstand a certain amount of cringiness. There's a fair bit of that in here too. Trust me, there's probably just as much cringiness in this one. But the subject matter of this teeters into absurd sexual fantasies to just a genuinely funny degree. And look, be attracted to whatever you're attracted to. It's just that the whole climax of the story is such a painstakingly detailed, absurdist sexual fantasy that it's meant to be enjoyed. The story concerns a gay character named Kant, who is the brother of another character to come in one of the stories. And Kant is a video game designer, and he's late to come out of his shell, I think, into his mid or late 20s. And then when he does, he starts dating this man that he feels really inferior to. Someone he just doesn't think that he deserves. There's always that kind of insecurity burrowed into every thought that he thinks throughout the story. And this pathology in part contributes to him both not being able to perform, but also just not being able to be completely vulnerable and open up about, again, incredibly detailed, incredibly cartoonish sexual fantasies. And so that's the main friction that the reader is forced to encounter along with him. Even though this is a tale of embarrassment and shame as much as the previous two, this one, as I said, rewards you with being a lot funnier. And I'll be honest, I underestimated the power of how hard the hammer was going to fall in this story. I can't remember who it was. This might be like a John Gardner art of fiction thing, but one of the old saws of short stories is that the ending should be both surprising and inevitable. And though I knew roughly the way it was going, I thought it was going to end... I don't know. I thought there was a certain amount of seriousness or a certain amount of disappointment that was going to be experienced. But the way it ended was just, I won't say a cliffhanger, but it sort of shows you the character makes a mistake and they don't realize their mistake until kind of off the page. I'll leave it at that. But of course, as I read the last words, I made, one or two connections with a piece of the action earlier, and this was just really wonderful. If you know what the word Ahegao means, you can kind of take a guess at the graphicness it's headed toward. The fourth story is called Our Dope Future. This one actually had me legitimately laughing out loud in my apartment. From early on, this is one of the characters who could probably benefit a little more from being neurotic or pathologized or self-conscious, but he's actually a bit too unaware of how he is. So first off, it's a framed narrative, as though a guy is posting on Reddit. This is a book overall that does a good job at, I think, capturing online culture without necessarily getting too bogged down into it. I will admit, I love reading through like those subreddits looking for something that's insane. This story is far more exaggerated than and satirical than anything that I've ever found written on there. But it concerns a guy who has developed a very kind of unique, millennial Zoomerfied idiolect. At one point, he kind of addresses this. He talks about being homeschooled, but that he's also like self-taught in all kinds of slang in different languages. So that's why he sort of talks the way he does. It's an over-modulated, Reddity, TikTokified, kind of young person slang. It's hard to exactly say, but it's annoying. But it's humorously annoying. It's someone who writes like they've read a bunch of slang, but never spoken like that to normal, well-adjusted people. He is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur type who has made money with a variety of bizarre startups, and he starts dating Allison, the girl from the second story, and he's very much a grind set, tech bro / dweeb, really, and he basically love bombs her, with all his wealth. Their second date, I think, is just an outrageously expensive European vacation, and he wants to do everything at 100%, and he wants her to move in with him, and he starts immediately planning their future together, and he gives her a deal where he's like, okay, if you don't want to marry me now, then just live with me for 6 months, sort of no strings attached, you can live here rent-free. He's obviously this just incredibly wealthy, unsocialized train wreck who's just trying to buy a wife, and he has, as you get deeper into the story, you find out he has these kind of very pro-natalist views, and it's very obvious that he and Allison are not a good match. But he's already married to his vision, so he's constantly trying to make it work, and he's constantly trying to reframe it about how he's trying to help her achieve her goals and achieve the future that, she deserves. In the meantime, he's working insane hours, and, she doesn't, very much kind of at his encouragement and insistence. And they just don't even have much of a romantic relationship, at all. And it's one that ends up being much creepier and surveillance-based and social engineering-based. And because it's ostensibly a Reddit post, he just continuously posts through it. There are a number of edits that that he makes at the end of the story, and those take insane turn after insane turn. This story gave me the most unmitigated joy. It's sort of fairly obvious what he is and where it's going, and yet it is very surprising in the end how the ante of his insanity keeps getting raised. Then we get to the story called Main Character. This story is where the book begins its sort of metafictional journey inward. This feels like the longest. I'm not sure exactly how long it is. I read a digital copy. A lot of these stories tend to be 30 plus pages, to give you an idea. This is definitely the most online story, I guess you could say. It's kind of literally about a main character or series of main characters on Twitter. The protagonist is the gender fluid, though they very much do not like labeling themselves as such, at least at first, sibling of Kant from the third story. This person's name is B, B-E-E. And all of the previous stories were a lot more focused on specific romantic relationships. This one is much more about the protagonist's relationship with the world and society in general. B is very smart, but kind of effortlessly so. And they are also the most sociopathic of anyone in this book. And so rather than previous characters who are, struggling with their pathology, they're struggling at first, but they kind of accept that about themselves. And because they accept it so stridently, that causes a lot of social friction. B goes to Stanford, and there's a scene early on with all the new roommates where B just engages in an extreme rhetorical refusal in a way that makes everyone else uncomfortable. They won't adhere to any of the labels or the boxes that anyone wants to put them with. And we find out that one of the characters in the house is actually the guy from the first story. I think his name's Brian, if I'm remembering. It's something very white boy normal. Anyway, because B feels very alienated from society, much of the way they make their money is just through lies and scams. They make a significant amount of money through running fake cam girl scams. But eventually they fall into an obsession with becoming various different kinds of Twitter shit posters and characters, all with different kind of political and social orientations, and they become this series of different main characters who start a series of flame wars on the internet around the kind of fringe, often overly woke scold and then sort of counter anti-woke dirtbag personalities. And the story that you're reading is them just revealing themselves to have been all of these different people that in many cases were just arguing with each other. And then at the end you find out, you're reading one of numerously duplicated versions of the story that B has fed through different LLMs so they can scramble their true confession among a infinite deluge of others. And then you have a series of commentaries of another internet poster, talking about their different kind of theories of who this person is, why they did it. And it's especially resonant now because it does touch on some of the same ideas that dead internet theory brings up. I think there's always been this notion in online culture that you don't know if you're talking to a real person, but I think that's especially relevant now in a time where a lot of social media is just getting overridden by AI and slop and bots. So another fantastic piece. The last two stories are very brief. 16 metaphors. The sixth story is just a really brief and beautiful piece of flash fiction. The title kind of tells you exactly what it is. Each metaphor is, you know, like a sentence or two. And there's not much to say. The way that, like, the seventh metafictional story puts it is that the editors considered it, you know, not very connected to the book, so they mostly pass over it without comment. So I think it's great. Yes, disconnected from a bit from the rest of the stories, but still beautiful on its own and wonderfully unique. Finally, the one I've been teasing a bit, this one's called Rejection, and this is just a metafictional rejection letter that is sent to Tony Tula by an unnamed publisher, which includes the reasons why they rejected this manuscript. And it has detailed notes on each of the stories in why kind of the book fails, especially in how the author is failing to be truly vulnerable to its reader, or truly honest in approaching the theme of rejection, or in how they all serve as, you know, selfish evasions rather than true explorations. It even comments on itself as a story as though it were outside of it, and I will be honest, I thought I wasn't going to like this story until about the last page or two, and I felt like it sealed itself up nicely in a really pleasing way. If it weren't for the fifth story, main character, I wouldn't see this necessarily as necessary, but because of, like, the somewhat metafictional structure of that one, I think the foundation is laid to excuse this story, for lack of a better word. That's the thing about metafiction. It always needs an excuse. There is something, even in this story, that feels to a contemporary reader a little passé or needing justification, which, again, something very much downstream of David Foster Wallace, at least for me. All in all, this is one of the best books I've read this year. It certainly bumped up Private Citizens up the to-read list to me, so hopefully I can set aside some time and get to that one soon. But this will absolutely make me keep my eye out on all Tony Tula stories in the future. This really does feel like a cultural statement that he's put out. It feels like it's going to be a well-remembered and important book. I think it's been longlisted for the National Book Award. We'll see how it does. That's all I got for you today. Thank you for watching. If you like my work, you know, please subscribe. Consider donating to my Ko-Fi. That's just a little digital tip jar. Link down in the description below. And give the video a thumbs up. I mean, you made it this far, right? Just do it already. Come on. Come on, come on, come on. Okay, love you, bye.